Hello, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 2 of the Midwest Gaming Classic Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garris, Panel Director of the Midwest Gaming Classic. Last week, we wrapped up our final panels from 2017. Now we're diving straight into the 2018 lineup. As retro gaming continues its surge in popularity, the need to chronicle and preserve the stories behind the classic developers, legendary companies, and the groundbreaking software that shaped the industry has never been greater. In this panel, author and historian Dr. Ken Horowitz, founder of SEGA16.com and one of the most respected researchers in classic gaming, shares his extensive experience documenting the rise, fall, and continued influence of Sega. From the company's early days producing arcade machines in the 1960s, to its explosive success with the Genesis/Mega Drive, to the hardware experimentation of the Sega CD, 32X, Game Gear, and the beloved but doomed Dreamcast. Sega's history is a story filled with bold ideas, fierce competition, and a dedicated global fan base. Dr. Horowitz discusses his research process for his books, including From Pinballs to Pixels, Playing at the Next Level, A History of America Sega Games, and the SEGA Arcade Revolution, and explains how interviewing developers, digging through archives, and uncovering long-lost production stories has helped preserve Sega's legacy. He also examines how these efforts serve as a blueprint for ongoing community-driven preservation of video game history. Join Dr. Horowitz as he showcases why documenting the stories behind our favorite games isn't just nostalgic. It's essential to ensuring that the creativity, innovation, and culture of our beloved hobby are never forgotten. And you know what? Enough of me talking. Why don't we get to the podcast?
Dr. Ken Horowitz has been archiving Sega's history for a number of years. In this presentation, he will discuss both the difficulties and the opportunities that has presented him.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ken Horowitz. I run the website Sega16.com. If anyone's ever... No? Yes? Thank you for the pity woo. I appreciate it. Okay, well, it's a website that I started in 2004, and it's dedicated to comprehensive reviews, features, and interviews about everything related to Sega's arcade and console history. That includes all its add-ons, all its consoles from the SG-1000 to the Dreamcast, and all its hardware platform, arcade platforms from the earliest machines that were electromechanical all the way up to the current Sega amusement products. And the whole focus of the website was to create a resource, a database of information that goes beyond just, okay, here's a game, this is what it's about, and it's good or it's bad because. The whole focus was to try to go beyond that and find information about how the games were made, who the people who made those games were, how they got involved. And so over the course of the last 14 years, we've interviewed well over 100 people, including Tom Kalinske, Michael Katz, Yuzo Kushido, and a bunch of other people who were involved. And that research led to, and I did my doctoral dissertation on the use of online multiplayer video games to reduce language anxiety and increase willingness to speak English as a second language. And while I was doing that, I found all kinds of information that seemed to be really interesting about video games that I thought would be good for an article, and that ended up being worked into a book, Playing at the Next Level, which is Sega's arcade, Sega of America's entire history. And so while I was doing that, that kind of made me realize that there's a big aspect of video game history, and this would have been a lot cooler with a PowerPoint, but just close your eyes and imagine. There's a whole aspect of video game history that is only now being examined. And if you go around and you see all the games that are for sale and the games that people are trading and buying and everything, it's wonderful that people of all ages are enjoying these games. But there are many aspects of those games that perhaps younger people don't know. How one game influenced the other. For example, that if it hadn't been for Namco's Mappy, Sega never would have made Flicky, or that Flicky appears in Sonic the Hedgehog, and all the different aspects of how these games come into being. And there's a pressing, I think, an urgent need. One of the quotes I had in the presentation was by Warren Spector, who said that our industry is considered by largely, basically said, paraphrasing, that the industry for many is practically considered almost disposable. The products come out one year and people play them, and then the next year they release the next version, and you're supposed to forget about the old versions, and they go offline, they're delisted, and once a game doesn't make any money, you're supposed to forget about it. And as you can see, this very event is an example that that's simply not true, that people love and enjoy these games for many, many, many years after the companies that make them forget they exist. And there's a pressing need, I think, to actually document this, to preserve it, because the people who make these games aren't getting any younger. And eventually, they won't be around to tell their stories. And one of the things I showed in the presentation was that I interviewed Michael Knox, who was the founder of Park Place Productions, the people who made the very first John Madden football games for consoles. And then they also made Joe Montana football. And there's a whole big story about how Joe Montana football came to be. But I interviewed him, and about 2 years later, he died. And then a couple of years later, I interviewed Joe Miller, who was Senior Vice President of Product Development for Sega of America. He was behind the development of the Sega Channel, the Sega Multimedia Studio, the release of the Nomad, big aspect of Sega's history in the mid-90s. And a year after I interviewed him, he died as well. I hope it's not me that's doing this, but it seems it's like, speak to me at your own risk. And then I currently just finished a book on Sega's arcade history, 62 games, the entire company's entire history from when it was founded all the way up to 2003 when it was merged with Namco, and the Sega that many people grew up with and remembered kind of morphed into something else. And one of the people who I got to speak to was Tom Petit, who was the president of Sega Enterprises USA from 1987 to 1994, practically during the company's heyday. And he was very, very generous, and he was very, very friendly and forthcoming with answers. I got to speak to him twice over the phone, bombard him insanely with emails, and then I asked him if he had any pictures he would like to contribute. And he told me they were in albums and they were in storage, and that he was going on vacation. Maybe when he came back in the spring, he would look for them. So it's like, okay. And I sat quietly and bit my bottom lip for 3 months until he was supposed to come back in the beginning of May, so I waited until the end of May, so I didn't jump right on him. Oh, excuse me, do you remember those pictures that I asked you? Oh, well, let me see what I do. And when they say that, usually it's like, don't cross your fingers. And then he sent me 2 emails with 14 pictures. And one of the pictures was him demoing Hang On, the sit-down version of Hang On, in 1985 when the game was being first debuted in America to distributors, and standing next to him is Nolan Bushnell. And Nolan Bushnell he has his pipe in his mouth, he's standing like this, and he has an expression, like very cynical expression. And I told him, Nolan Bushnell's in that picture. It's like, yeah, he gave me my first job out of college at Atari. And I basically went over to him, and because Atari had an activity in that same building. And he went to him and said, oh, look what we've got, we're going to wipe you off the, messing around with them. This is Sega's new product that's going to wipe the floor with you. And so Nolan Bushnell walked over and said, go ahead, impress me. And he stood there like, waiting to be impressed. And somebody took that picture. Another picture he gave me was a picture of him, Tom Kalinske, and David Rosen, one of the founders of Sega, together, sitting together. And to my knowledge, there is no picture of those three men together. And the whole significance of this is that he sent me that, and about 6 months later, he died. So I did it again. But the thing is that he had never spoken to anyone before this, ever, about his time at Sega. He did one interview when Time Traveler was released a video. He said 2 or 3 promotional things about it, and that was it. And if I'm thinking, wow, I had the chance to speak to him in depth, and if I hadn't been able to do that, then he would have died, and all those stories, all that information would have been gone. I got the chance to interview Tom Kalinske in 2006, and the very first question I asked him was, you have not given any interviews, because at the time he had not spoken to anyone, you have not given any interviews to anyone since you left Sega. Why not? And his answer was, nobody asked me. And that amazed me. That amazed me. And a lot of the people that I've had the chance to speak to are as amazed that I want to speak to them as I am that they want me to speak to them. It's like they don't think that anyone, like I was just a designer. It's like, yeah, but you're the guy who designed this, Oh, but I'm just an artist, but you're the guy who drew this, And to this day, that still resonates. And so it's important, I think, that people recognize that these aren't just games that you play and throw away. These are games that are going to be cherished generation after generation. I was just talking to this gentleman over here, and he told me, how many times you bought Super Mario Brothers? 12 times. And I don't think I bought Sonic the Hedgehog that many, but it's pretty close. And a lot of people think, oh my God, they're releasing these games again. But I have a 10-year-old daughter. And the fact that my 10-year-old daughter can still play and enjoy a game that I enjoyed when I was 13 when it came out, that I pumped more money than I can remember into that arcade game until I was able to play it on the NES. The fact that that game is still available for them to play is extremely important, because there are plenty of games. For example, even just using Sega as an example, Outrun 2 Online, that was released on Xbox 360. Has anyone played it, download it? No Outrun fans? Yeah. Delisted, Afterburner Climax. Great game, delisted. So those were digital-only titles that are no longer available because Sega no longer has the Ferrari license and no longer has the license to I don't know if it's Boeing or Lockheed who makes the planes. So those games are delisted. So now what happens if a future generation wants to play, if future generations are looking for games to play, older games, that game is a game that's never going to come up never going to come on their radar, because it's no longer available. And so one of the ways to create awareness that these games actually do exist and should be sought out and played is by speaking to the people who made them. And one thing that I'm really, really amazed is that in 14 years since I started my website, I have not seen a Nintendo 16. Which amazes me. I mean, you have Nintendo Age and other websites that focus on selling and collecting, but things like the actual behind the scenes, how these games were made, talking to the people who made them, doesn't seem to be, I'm not going to say it doesn't seem to be a priority, but it doesn't seem to be something that a lot of people are motivated to do. And the thing is, you don't have to go and write research and hunt down people and interview them. It helps, but it's something that people can do. YouTube has become a very big tool now for people to use to create videos about older games. And a lot of people knock on, because people criticize everything, right? A lot of people knock on, for example, the Angry Video Game Nerd and other things like that, other similar personalities. But what have those people done? Now people are criticizing and forming opinions on a topic that maybe 10 years ago they weren't discussing at all. So it's better that they're forming opinions and having discussions and even arguments than it is for no one to be discussing these things at all. And one of the things I hoped to do, look, just put my little grain of sand with the work I do, is to at least create awareness for people of this other aspect, of retro gaming, because Nintendo is the most popular, right? But there's just so many other games to enjoy that many people have it. TurboGrafx, Neo Geo, and other obscure machines that need their someone to defend them. They need someone to go out and find these people and speak to them. And a lot of them are very available, and a lot of them are very willing to speak. I had the chance to finally meet in person several people, like Brian Collin, who created Rampage. He also created General Chaos on the Genesis. I got to speak in person and meet Michael Mendheim, created Mutant League Football, Mutant League Hockey, which were several games that I played to death in college, and I finally got to meet the people. I was thrilled that I got to speak to them via email, and now I got to walk up to them and shake their hand, and that is an amazing feeling, and to be able to tell them, that they had that impact, and them, just like many others that I've spoken to, they're very humble and they're very grateful that people still enjoy the things that they created. And if you look, for example, like the Nintendo NES Classic, that came out and supposedly came out. I think I have a better chance of catching a chupacabra having dinner with Bigfoot than I would of actually finding one of those in the wild. Never saw one in the wild until today, when I saw one at a seller who had one on a table. It's like Walmart and Toys R Us all had the banners up, like teasing, and they never ever had them in stock. It's like they brought them in black SUVs in the middle of the night with a police escort, and then I don't know if the employees bought them or who bought them, but I never ever saw one in the wild. And but that sold 2.3 million units in 5 months. 2.3 million units. And it's still, I'm sure if that should have been an evergreen product, something they should have continually sold all year round, even at Christmas, especially Christmas. And then the SNES Classic, they didn't make the same mistake, and it's been readily available. Most people have been able to get one, and supposedly they're going to re-release the NES Classic this summer, which I sincerely hope they do. But Nintendo themselves, were taken aback by the demand. They did not expect there to be such a great demand. And Nintendo is a company that has continuously produced hardware, continuously maintained its star franchises in the limelight, and has basically never lost its position as a premier hardware maker since it started. And they weren't aware that there was that kind of demand for their product. That's why I was so excited when Sega said they were going to release a Mega Drive Mini, until I heard it was powered by AtGames, and then I threw up a little bit in my mouth. But I don't know. It's like you want to applaud them for trying, but in your mind you're thinking you're not trying. But they at least released Shenmue. They're going to release Shenmue 1 and 2 HD, which is at least something that people have been clamoring for, and they've been listening to. And we could probably go down an entire list of games by different companies that deserve a remastering and deserve a re-release that may not get it or may not get it for several years. But the fact is that the demand is there. And if Nintendo was not aware that there was such a demand for its product, then imagine other companies like whoever it is now that holds the rights to the TurboGrafx NEC library. The company that, I forgot the name of it, but no, Data East doesn't exist, and a company, huh? Yeah, they own the rights to their catalog, right? You know, and so SNK, so the SNK at least has been dripping out its releases for, and now they've just announced a release of its pre-Neo Geo, practically pre-Neo Geo fight library, which is what I have been waiting for a long time, to get all those classics from the 80s and the early 90s before they became well regarded for their fighting games. But so what happens when we have the companies that are unaware that people are interested in their product, and the demand is as large as it is. What can you do? I mean, people can send emails and they can tweet and they can fill out petitions, but do companies really listen to these all the time? Not all the time. Sometimes they do, but most of the times they're aware and grateful and considerate of your requests, but they put them in a folder somewhere in a locker in a basement and they forget they exist. And so that's why I think that one way we can create the awareness that these games are still in demand is by speaking to the people who made them and speaking to the even if there were people who were just executives, people who were producers or people who were promotional specialists and advertising managers, but if they had a hand in making these products become real and become available, then they should be spoken to. And that goes for every console, every game ever made. But the problem is that the companies themselves aren't always as willing to help out. When I wrote about Sega of America, that was kind of easy because I had spoken to a lot of these people before, and when I spoke to them again, they told me, oh, well, you need to speak to this guy. And they sent that guy an email saying, this guy wants to talk to you. And so that guy was really receptive. And I ended up speaking in one case to that guy and his wife, because they both had worked at Sega of America. And it became a conference call. But I ended up getting 2 separate interviews out of it. And there are a lot of people who were willing. No one said, I'll speak off the record, or I don't want you to use my name. No one. And I spoke to 97 different people. When I did the second book, which was mostly Japanese related, it was very, very difficult to speak to anyone beyond those who worked at Sega Gremlin and Sega Electronics during the late 70s and early 80s, because on the Japanese side, they clamped down hard. I mean, there are a lot of personalities. For example, her name just slipped my mind. There was one, Riko Kodama, who was one of the people involved with Phantasy Star 2, Alex Kidd. I mean, she's the Skies of Arcadia. They call her the first lady of RPGs. She's practically off limits. They will not allow her to speak to anyone in public. And the way a lot of the times it works is that if you want to speak to them, they'll say, okay, what organization do you represent? Okay, what's your circulation? What's your readership? How many views do you get? And if you don't merit, if you're not big time enough, then they will shoot you down. And if they do manage, I was able to speak to some people because I became I got into regular contact with someone from Sega Europe, and that person kind of like spoke on my behalf, like, come on, yeah, give him a chance. And the way it works is send us your questions, and we'll screen your questions, and we'll filter out any questions we don't want to answer. So they told me, if you're going to ask 10 questions, send them 16, 17, 18 questions. Because chances are, if you send 10, they'll only answer 3 or 4. And even now, I just interviewed somebody who doesn't even work for Sega anymore. And he had to go and told me, well, I sent him my questions. And he said, well, let me run the questions by my former colleagues to see if it's okay if I speak to you. It's like, but you don't work there anymore. And he said, well, as long as the questions are positive in context and don't delve into anything, corporate history, as long as you want to talk about how the game was made and things like that, very happy to answer your questions. But they gave me specific criteria of what I could ask, and they had to be screened first. And he doesn't even work there anymore. So that kind of makes this research a little bit more difficult, especially if these games are games that were released in Japan in the 1980s or late 1970s, and any documentation involved is in Japanese. And that can be very difficult. And if you're like me and you don't speak Japanese, it can be very expensive. I had to hire a fellow who has a bachelor's degree in Japanese linguistics. He's fluent in English, German, Japanese, and like 3 other languages, to translate interviews and documents. He translated dozens of interviews and documents, each one individually priced. And it cost a lot of money, probably more money than I'll make back on the actual book itself, but there are a lot of documents and interviews that have never been in English before. And I don't know what these documents say. I mean, I found an interview that had the arcade game Buck Rogers, and it had a girl next to it, and she she's pointing at the game and she's in the game and she's smiling and gesturing towards the game, and it had an interview format. And I was thinking, hey, well, I told him, could you please look at this? Maybe she's a developer. Maybe she did something, she's involved with the game, or she's a Sega employee. And she was a Japanese pop star who was promoting the game at a mall. And they just asked her about, what's your favorite Sega game? And what do you like best about Sega? Stupid, fluffy questions like that. And so there were so many articles that is this one good? Can we use this one? Can we use this one? And he was like, nope, this guy doesn't say anything. Nope. And it was very tedious and very, very time consuming. But it was something that I think has to be done, because in the long run, the time and the effort and the money that I spend, once the work is done, then that work is forever. And no one else has to do the work. My attitude has always been, I read, I'll go through 50 issues of Replay Magazine and Cashbox and all these other websites and everything to write an article so you don't have to. But I'll provide whatever source I can. And it's important, I think, that people become more active in doing this, because one of the other examples I had about the disposable nature of the video game industry was Call of Duty, and how Call of Duty is released practically on a yearly basis, right? And just like Madden football. And when the next one comes out, what happens to the old one? And then some of the old ones are still popular, right? I think it was Modern Warfare they actually brought back and remastered it. Why would they remaster a game that they've released multiple versions of since? Because people still enjoy and still play it. Dark Souls, Demon Souls went offline. And practically instantly, it came back online in a private server. And they're going to make that code available so that you could actually host a private server of your own with the world tendencies and everything, so people can continue to connect and play Demon Souls online. Now, you can't blame Bandai and you can't blame From Software for taking it offline. Consider that we jumped this console generation, it was online for 9 years. But the thing is that that's just a game with an online component. What do you do with a game that was entirely online? And I was looking around the floor and I was looking for Dreamcast games, and I saw Alien Front online, and I saw, Alien Front online, and I saw a couple of other games that were specifically Phantasy Star Online, which are specifically online games. You can play them by yourself, but that's about as much fun as watching paint dry, because those games were designed to be played with other people, right? It's like Monster Hunter World. Played Monster Hunter World? You played Monster Hunter World by yourself? No one plays Monster Hunter World? No? Okay. Well, Monster Hunter World is a game. We've heard of the Monster Hunter series, right? Well, this one, it's online, it's very well done, easy to find people, easy to exchange cards so that you can come contact and get online with people. And if someone on your friends list is playing it, you can click and jump right into the session they're in and play with them. All the mistakes they had made with previous versions of Monster Hunter have been fixed. I remember when Monster Hunter 3 came out on the Wii, I actually had the copy with the Wii Speak so I could play and talk to my friend. And we went through, it took us like 3 hours to get connected. And I live in the Caribbean, and there are tremors, the earthquakes every so often. And that was a Saturday night at 12 o'clock in the morning, in night. And we finally got it connected. It took us like 45 minutes, and we finally started to speak. And then there was a tremor, and my game shelf moved like 6 inches to the left. And my friend was all hysterical because the earth moved. I was like, well, we got this thing to work. That's what happened. We actually got it to work. We got the Wii Speak to work, and the fact that all that fell into place caused the earth to move because it was that difficult. And they fixed that with this version. And you can play it online. As a matter of fact, if you leave the game idle long enough, it'll disconnect you and if you let it idle, it'll disconnect and go offline mode. If you can't find any online or can't connect online, it'll start you in offline mode. And you can play the game completely offline. But it just isn't as much fun as running around and killing monsters with 3 other people. But what happens then, 10 years from now, 5 years, whenever it is that Capcom decides to take those servers offline, how do we preserve that for future generations? Phantasy Star Online on the PC, you can download Blueburst and other versions and play it online on a private server. And at any time, there are between 75 and 200 people playing, which is a pretty decent number. Usually you're able to play with one or two people through a level. But the fact that someone actually took the time to make that happen is amazing. And so my whole point with this is that you don't have to run out and interview people or create private servers, but you do have to at least be aware that we have a hobby that isn't like movies. And this was an example that I used in the presentation. Frank Cifaldi at the Game Developers Conference a couple of years ago used the example of the movie Uncle Buck. That Uncle Buck has been re-released. There's like 19 different versions of Uncle Buck. You can get it right now on DVD, on Blu-ray. You can get it in a combo pack, like 3 John Candy movies. You can get it in another combo pack. You can get it it's on, I don't know if it's on Netflix or it was on Hulu, but like at no point since the movie was available on home video in the mid-90s has there been fewer than 2 versions of Uncle Buck that you could acquire. And the video game industry doesn't do that. Many games, once they go offline, once the console, you have a PlayStation 3 and you bought a PlayStation 4, you have to keep that PlayStation 3 hooked up because those games aren't backwards compatible. And one thing I applaud Microsoft greatly for doing is for not just keeping Xbox 360 backwards compatibility, but also original Xbox. Panzer Dragoon Orta is now going to be made available. All they have to do now is get the Otogi and Jet Set Radio Future games, and we're good. But there, I think it's something like 10 games or so that are going to be made backwards compatible. Breakdown and a few other games. And so hopefully they'll move towards a model where Xbox just won't be a console, but a brand, and you'll be able to play games from every generation on the same machine, which would be ideal. I mean, we can't have universal format like DVD, where every company releases things on Blu-ray, because Nintendo probably wouldn't go for that, Sony wouldn't go for that, and Microsoft wouldn't go for that. But that you have on one Sony machine every games from every console that Sony's made available, and on one machine every games from every console Nintendo has made available, that would be absolutely wonderful. Of course, not every game is going to be possible because of licensing issues and things. Remember when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, was made available for download? That was a deal between Konami and Ubisoft because Konami no longer has the rights to the Ninja Turtle games. Castle of Illusion, the remake, that was a collaboration between Disney and Sega. They had to go and basically do a new contract because that contract expired years ago. So, well, what happens if Disney had said no thank you? Then the game wouldn't have been remade. Then the original wouldn't have been re-released as a bonus. And then if you didn't have a Sega Genesis, you couldn't play it. And so while many of us might have all our old consoles hooked up to the television, as time marches on and technology changes and HD TVs become, we have to find all these workarounds to get our machines to work on an HD TV and look as good as they did on older televisions. We have to, it becomes more and more difficult for all of these games to be made available. I love Disney's Aladdin on the Sega Genesis. That game will probably never be re-released anywhere ever again because that was a 3-way collaboration between Disney, Virgin Games, and Sega. And so you would have to get all 3 of those to come on board for that to be released. It could happen, but if it does happen, it'll probably happen once. And I doubt they'll agree to re-release that periodically every certain amount of years. So if we don't take these steps, then we're going to end up with a history that's lost. And it would be unfortunate. I like to play a game with my daughter, and my daughter asks me, "Daddy, who's that?" Or "Why is Sonic blue?" And I like, boop, 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 boop. You want to know about Sonic the Hedgehog? Sit down, How much time do you have? Once there was a company called Sega, and I like being able to share those tidbits of history with them so that they understand, where these, that there's a human dimension, a human aspect behind the creation of these games. And so I plan to continue to speak to these people for as long as they'll let me speak to them. And Joe Miller, I was after Joe Miller for 1.5 years to get him to speak to me. I was after Yuzo Koshida for 2 years because he was always, yes, let's do it. And then, all right, I'll send you the questions. Well, I'm kind of busy, I'm on tour, or I'm doing this and do that. I'll contact you. And 6 months later, have you finished your tour? Yes, send me the questions. I send the questions. 3 months later, well, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to answer your questions because I'm doing this, this, and this. It got to the point that he felt so bad that actually sent me a package with some soundtracks in them and a little note apologizing. And to me, that was more, I was like, I got a package from Japan, and I was thinking, I told my wife, don't open it. You know, I'm not expecting any packages. Don't open it. Who sent it? She's like, some guy named Koshido. And I was just like, I was like, what? And when I opened it, it was a Streets of Rage soundtracks and a collection of his hits. And he had a little note saying, you know, sorry, in English, sorry for being such a bad sport, you know, and taking so long. And so I want to frame the note, and I have it hidden in a special tiny little place and everything. And the interview was just a simple interview. He answered 10 questions about, you know, how he got into making music for video games and working with the hardware and things like that. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, and I was amazed that he actually, you know, followed through and actually took it, you know, made it that personal a thing. And I'm pretty sure that he gets interviewed a lot. You know, and there are other people that really don't get interviewed at all. I interviewed the guy who created the Strike series, Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, and Urban Strike. And after I did the interview and published it, his email to me was, "Thank you for remembering me." And I found that to be really, you know, I was like, "Aw, you know, why wouldn't I remember you? I mean, I still play. I told him I still play the games. I still own those games. Those games, people still play them. Why wouldn't we remember you?" You know, and EA was better in that regard in that they actually included a credit list at the back of the manual. And most Japanese games wouldn't give you the names at all because early on they weren't allowed to give credit because they were afraid of other companies poaching their talent. So they would use pseudonyms, like Riko Kodama was Phoenix Rue, and guys were Ippo and Bo. I remember that we all loved Bo makes the best music, and we didn't know who the hell Bo was. And we like just every time you finished the game, you sat and watched the credits and maybe Bo, Bo made it. And then I found out Bo was Tohiko Uwabo and all the games that he made, and it's like, wow, that's what he looked. I saw his picture. It's like he's a middle-aged bald man, you know. And because I saw him years later, because at the time you had no way to see who these people were. And we would always write, like, take down the names, like, okay, this game, and sometimes it got to the point where you could listen to the music, and just by the style of the music, you might have an idea of who wrote it, you know. And it's not like today that you have the interviews with all these Richard Jocks and Howard Johnson and all these guys that make the music. So it was so interesting to try and, you know, find out who made these things that we love so much. And now today that I have the chance to actually do that, it's not just a fun for me. It's not just a privilege. It's an honor that I get to actually document what these people do. And it's my hope that more people will begin to take up that kind of interest in preserving and documenting the history of this industry, because I would like it to be like music and movies and have them release a 10th anniversary edition and a 20th anniversary edition, and you to be able to go online and find the games you want and have access to them. It'd be very, very unfortunate if, you know, as the years go on, not only will I not be able to tell my kids about these games, I won't be able to find the games. I'll have to dig a console out of the closet and find some way to hook it up to whatever the television technology 20 years from now is, just so they can see it and know that it exists. You know, because they sure don't have to do that with Uncle Buck. You know, they can just, it's either shown on television or it's on Netflix, or they can buy one of the DVD versions of it. But if you want to play a video game from 1987 or 1980, if you don't have the hardware and the capabilities to connect it, many times you're out of luck and you won't be able to play it. So it's something that I think is becoming more and more a priority as time goes on, and the people involved with these, because it's not just the developers, also the people who used to work in the companies when these games were around. They leave, they die off, and then the people who are there now may not have that tie. They may not see that urgency, and so the games become less and less of a priority for them, and then they disappear. And that's what we don't want, right? The whole fact that we are here this weekend is to celebrate these games, older games, whether they're Nintendo, Sega, TurboGrafx, Neo Geo, or whatever your preferred machine or machines may be. We're here to celebrate them and enjoy them. And it would be wonderful if 20 years from now, it wasn't any more difficult, at least, than it is today. Okay. I still have so we got about 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions.
Yeah, more of a comment really. I'm kind of a preservationist myself. Like when the box went offline, I was down there going online, downloading all the patches, all the free DLC that existed and that kind of thing. The same with the DS when that went offline. Something I noticed just last week that's going to make things more tough. Grand Theft Auto 4. So usually I go and I'll download all the latest patches on like 360, PS3, whatever. So I have the final best version of that game. But I saw that later this month they're going to release a patch that removes games or some of the music from Grand Theft Auto 4. So if you want the best version of that, like you need to get on there now, get like the latest update as of now, and not download that patch that comes out later this month. So things like that are going to make it tough.
Well, using the original Xbox as an example, the original Splinter Cell had 2, I think it was, downloadable extra levels. And the only way for you to access them now, because Xbox Live for the original Xbox is gone, is to find the copy of the official Xbox Magazine demo disc that had those 2 levels and put them in your Xbox and copy them to the hard drive. If you don't have a copy of that disc, it was a submarine level and another level, I believe. There's no way to access them because you can't download them from Xbox Live anymore.
Yeah, so a similar one to that, there were some SOCOM levels that were on a PlayStation Magazine disc for the original PS2, and you had to have a hard drive, and you had to run that disc that came with PlayStation Magazine to get those extra levels for SOCOM. So, yeah, it's hard to preserve that stuff.
Very true, very true. Any other questions?
Just really quick, how do you go about identifying or prioritizing these gaps in history? Is there some well-known gaps in Sega's history that are unknown that you're pursuing, or is it you're playing a game and you want to find out more about that particular one?
Well, basically, there are a lot of gaps. In its console history, the more you get towards the Dreamcast era, the less those gaps are, the smaller they are, because you had the internet and you had many more publications. You had magazines like Next Generation Magazine that was actually doing interviews every month. But if you go back towards, for example, the Sega Master System era, there are huge gaps. And one of the first chapter of the book I wrote on Sega of America's history covers the formation of Sega of America. And I interviewed Bruce Lowry, who was the first president of Sega of America, who has never been interviewed, and to get the whole the whole story of how they actually formed it, and how Tonka, the role that Tonka played. And I spoke to Steve Morris, who was the general manager of Tonka in charge of Sega Master System, and he told me that basically the head of this guy, the last name was Feely, came back from the head of Tonka came back from the Tokyo Toy Fair and saw the Sega stuff, and he asked Morris if he had played it, and Morris said, yeah, I know a little bit about it. He said, all right, I want you to be in charge of it. And he's like, all right. And so it was very difficult for them they were a toy company. So their whole thing was distribution and marketing, but they weren't really knowledgeable about video games. And Bruce Lowry resigned when Tonka became involved because they had the Master System and all retail outlets that they needed, and it was just a question of pushing it. And there was a whole aspect of that whole era that I'd never heard of, and I bought a Master System at launch, and a lot of the games are just ports for localizations of Japanese games there. So I think Monopoly was the first Sega game made in the USA. Everything else was just ports. So you look at the games and at the end, and few of them have credits and they have pseudonyms, and there's just no way to talk to anyone there. Okay, well, one more question.
Yeah, I'm actually a current developer myself, just trying to get into the industry. Do you have any advice for new guys like me?
My advice to you is back up everything. Not just code, I mean design documents. I mean pictures, as much as you can. Someone recently tweeted pictures, one of the designers on the original Outrun put on his Twitter feed concept art of the machine when he went to pitch it, when they had to come up with what the machine, the deluxe cab would look like. That's never been published before. He had them. Sega didn't have them. And Sega told me when I asked them for assets to use in the book that they didn't have anyone organizing the artwork for their arcade division. They had for consoles, but they hadn't for their arcade division. And considering it's a company that's been making arcade games since the mid-1950s and video games since 1973, the fact that they didn't think that someone should catalog and organize all the artwork and things like that is extremely unfortunate. So my recommendation would be, from the preservation and historical aspect, back up everything. Digitize your design documents, or once they're not trade secrets anymore. Things like that, to make sure that they're not lost for future generations. Okay, I'd like to thank you all very much for coming, and if you would be interested in buying 1, 2, 10 copies of my books, they're available through Amazon. Playing at the Next Level, A History of American Sega Games. And the next one comes out this October, which is the Sega Arcade Revolution, A History in 62 Games. That covers 62 games in depth with developer information and design and creation data as well as a lot of cool photos. So I hope you'll at least check them out and see if they're to your liking. Thanks again for coming. I hope you have a great weekend.
And that's the end of this podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, hearing from author and historian Dr. Ken Horowitz on the innovative video game company Sega. They created some of the greatest characters in video games ever, one of them being Sonic the Hedgehog, which I totally love Sonic games. And they've been very innovative with the games themselves, along with the Sega CD, 32X, Game Gear, and one of my favorite video game consoles of all time, Dreamcast. We hope to see Dr. Ken Horowitz in the future. And until next time, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and game on.